At my mother's funeral, my brother whispered the unthinkable. The church smelled faintly of lavender, the scent she loved most. I stood at the edge of her coffin, hands trembling as sunlight fractured through the stained glass. My name is Margaret. I am 56 years old, and in that moment I felt both daughter and orphan, anchored in grief, adrift in disbelief. Daniel leaned in, his breath brushing my ear. "The will is mine." Just 5 words, hushed beneath the choir's hymn, yet they shattered something sacred. I turned to him, searching for grief in his eyes, but found only calculation. The choir's harmony faltered for a beat, as if even God hesitated to hear. I clutched the hymn book tighter. Its leather felt warm, familiar. For a brief moment, I was back at our kitchen table, Mother's voice filling the house, reading psalms between sips of tea. The memory flickered like candlelight against the cold marble floor. Around me, mourners offered their condolences, hands pressing mine, eyes full of pity that barely masked curiosity. Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on the casket, but his smirk lingered. He whispered again, softer this time, "You'll see soon enough." I wanted to believe grief made him cruel, that sorrow twisted his words, but something in his tone felt rehearsed. A chill crept beneath my collar, despite the warm air. Lavender should have been comforting. It was her scent, her ritual, but it turned sickly sweet, almost mocking. The service droned on. I heard none of it. Instead, I studied Daniel's face, the set of his jaw, the faint sheen of satisfaction when the lawyer approached the pews. Every gesture felt choreographed, a play I hadn't known I was part of. When the final hymn ended, I stepped outside. The world looked softer through tears, the sun gentler. Yet beneath that fragile peace, something else stirred. Unease, heavy and growing. Mrs. Warren, Mother's oldest friend, touched my shoulder. "She was proud of you both," she said kindly. I forced a nod. She deserved peace. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, who was shaking hands, laughing quietly with the lawyer. "Peace comes slow in families," she murmured before walking away. I lingered near the roses Mother had loved. Their petals brushed against my hand, cool and smooth, grounding me for a heartbeat. But his whisper echoed again, louder in memory than it had been in sound. "The will is mine." What could he mean? Mother had always promised fairness, everything split evenly. We'd grown up hearing it like a blessing. There were no secrets, or so I believed. The choir's melody still floated faintly through the church doors. I found myself humming along, half prayer, half defense. Each note steadied me. Then a thought struck, sharp and unwelcome. What if the will had been changed? I shook the idea away. Mother trusted me. She trusted both of us. But doubt is a seed that grows quickly, in grief. By the time the crowd dispersed, the roses had started to wilt under the afternoon sun. Daniel approached, expression unreadable. "You should go home, Margaret," he said. "I'll handle the paperwork." "I'll be there," I replied evenly. "It's still our mother's estate." He smiled, thin and deliberate. "Of course, our mother." The way he said, "our," made it sound like a threat. Later that night, I lit one of her candles on my dresser. The wax had a faint scent of lavender. Its small flame trembled as if aware of what had begun. I looked at the framed photograph of her, smiling, alive, trusting, and whispered back into the quiet room, "No, Daniel, I'll see soon enough." Because his whisper had followed me home, and it would not let me sleep. The drawer refused to open, as if guarding her secret. It was past midnight, and the house still smelled faintly of wax and lilies. The quiet had grown heavier since the funeral, pressing against the walls, making every creak sound like her ghost returning to check if I'd locked the windows. I sat at her old desk, the one she used for her letters and bills, and ran my hand across the polished surface. The wood was smooth, almost alive under my fingertips, its grain warm despite the chill outside. I'd never noticed the small scratch near the corner before, or the tiny strip of tape clinging to its underside. When I peeled it away, a brass key dropped onto the floor with a soft metallic sigh. I hesitated. "What were you hiding, Mother?" The lock turned with surprising ease, the sound too loud for that late hour. Inside the drawer lay a collection of envelopes tied with blue ribbon, a faint scent of dust and paper rising as I lifted them out. Beneath them sat a small black USB drive, its surface scratched, labeled only with our initials, M&D. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into my laptop. The screen came alive with a pulse of light. Folders appeared, one after another, scanned letters, contracts, bank drafts. My breath caught when I saw her signature on documents I'd never known existed. Some were marked with a digital reference, neat and official, each ending in her name followed by the same date pattern. My pulse raced. There were transfers, small, recurring sums of $5,000, labeled consultation fees. I remembered Mother telling me Daniel had been helping with her finances. But this looked nothing like help. It looked like control. I clicked another file, a letter she'd never sent. Daniel grows impatient. He insists I sign before the new year. I told him I want Margaret involved. He said she doesn't need to know. The air seemed to thin. My throat tightened. The desk lamp flickered once, then steadied, its light trembling over the wood grain. I whispered, "What did he make you sign?" My phone buzzed suddenly. A message from an unknown number. "Be careful what you open." I froze. The light from the screen glared against the framed photograph on the wall, Mother, Daniel, and me, smiling on her last birthday. His arm rested around her shoulder, his eyes already somewhere else. I called Mrs. Carden, one of Mother's old contacts at the legal firm. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Send me what you found," she said. "But do it from a secure line. He's done this before, Margaret. He knows how to cover his tracks." Her warning pressed cold against my spine. "You think he forged something?" I asked. "I think," she said carefully, "he's been preparing for this for a long time." The house felt different after the call, emptier, watchful. Even the ticking clock seemed louder, like it was counting down to something I couldn't see. I unplugged the drive, slipped it into a small velvet pouch, and locked it in my nightstand. The key I kept in my hand until morning. When I finally tried to sleep, the screen's afterglow still burned behind my eyelids. I could see the folders, the dates, the false comfort of her digital signature. Daniel's words from the funeral returned to me, whispering through the dark, "The will is mine." Now I understood he hadn't been boasting. He'd been confessing. The next morning, I printed one document, the last one she'd saved, marked Final Draft Reference 9A. The timestamp blinked at the bottom right corner, cold and undeniable. 1 month before she died. The files were dated a month before she died. The teller looked at me as if I were the thief. The glass between us gleamed under the fluorescent lights, dividing truth from disbelief. I slid my mother's account folder toward her, explaining softly that I needed access to settle funeral expenses. She typed something, eyes darting to the screen, then to me. Her polite smile vanished. "I'm sorry," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "These accounts were already updated last week." The word "updated" landed like a stone. Behind her, the printer whirred, spitting out sheets of paper I couldn't read. Every sound in that bank, the ticking clock, the shuffling of feet, the scratching of pens, seemed to accuse me. I could almost hear betrayal taking form in ink. "Updated by whom?" I asked. She glanced toward the manager's office. "By your brother," she murmured. "He brought in the new will. The signatures are notarized." My throat tightened. "That's impossible." "He said he's executor now." For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the marble floor. I tried to breathe, but the air smelled faintly of paper and metal, like old coins and ink drying on deceit. A sound cut through the silence, the sharp scratch of a pen behind the counter, deliberate and rhythmic. It echoed off the glass partition, steady as gilt. I pressed my palms flat against the counter. "Can you print me a copy?" "I shouldn't," she said, glancing around nervously. "Please, just one page." Her hesitation lingered until the manager turned away. Then, quickly, she slipped a folded receipt across the counter. "This one looked different," she whispered. I unfolded it. My mother's signature sprawled across the bottom, but the letters trembled, uneven and frail. My mother's hand had always been steady, proud, her penmanship clear even in her final months. This looked forced. The proof was in the strokes. I tucked the receipt into my purse, my heart hammering like the teller's hidden courage. As I turned to leave, the manager called after me. "Miss, your brother mentioned he'd handle all transactions going forward." I looked back, voice low but firm. "He doesn't speak for her." He frowned, gesturing toward the folder in my hands. "He does now, ma'am. The documents are valid. Reference entry 217B. Outside, the city bells rang noon. The sunlight felt too bright, sharp against the glass doors. I stood there for a long time, watching people move as if the world hadn't tilted. Then I saw Daniel across the street. He was leaning against his car, phone in hand, smirking as if waiting for me to emerge. The sight chilled me. How long had he been planning this? I walked past him without a word. His voice followed me, light and careless. "Mother trusted me, you know. She said you wouldn't understand her decisions." I didn't answer. My silence was the only weapon I had left in that moment. Down the block, the church bells began again, their sound mingling with my footsteps. I pulled the receipt from my purse, staring at the uneven letters until they blurred. Every curve of that trembling signature screamed the same thing. "She didn't write this." I whispered to the wind. Her hand never trembled like that. And I knew then, the theft wasn't of money. It was of her truth. He raised his glass and said, "To new beginnings." The words floated above the table like smoke, sweet at first, then choking. The candles flickered, catching the rim of his glass in a small, trembling halo. For a heartbeat, it looked beautiful. Then he smirked, and the illusion shattered. The table was set for 4, a roast cooling at the center, red wine gleaming like truth waiting to spill. I'd invited him and his wife in good faith, or maybe in desperation. I needed to see if his lies could survive the light of our mother's house. He carved through the meal as if he owned the place. His wife filled the silence with brittle compliments about the furniture, the food, the way the house still smells like her. I smiled, though every word scraped. Halfway through dinner, I finally spoke. "I went to the bank today." His knife paused midair. "Oh?" "They showed me the new will." He leaned back. "Mother wanted things simple. I just helped her arrange." "There's a problem with her signature," I said quietly. The air changed. Even the warmth from the candles seemed to shrink. He laughed, short, sharp. "You're seeing ghosts, Margaret. You always do." "She never wrote like that." He raised his glass again, this time slower. "She trusted me. Maybe that's what bothers you most." The glass tilted, a crimson streak running down the side like blood. He let it drip onto the tablecloth, not even pretending to care. The stain spread, round and perfect. Across from me, Dr. Ellis cleared his throat. "Let's not—" But Daniel cut him off. "Mother owed me. I paid her debts for years. It's only fair." His voice carried the easy confidence of someone who's rehearsed his lie too many times. I stared at him, trying to find a trace of the boy who used to fix my bike or sneak candy from the cupboard. All I saw was a stranger wearing his face. "You think fairness is measured in money?" I asked. He smirked. "Fairness is what you can prove." The doctor shifted uneasily beside me, eyes darting to the napkin in my hand. I realized I'd been gripping it so tightly that the fabric had warmed against my skin. A single spot of wine bloomed where my fingers pressed, proof and prophecy in one. For a long while, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the soft tick of the clock over the fireplace. I watched the candlelight tremble, the flame fighting the draft each time Daniel exhaled through his nose. His wife broke the silence. "Let's not dwell on paperwork. We're family." Her attempt at peace fell flat. The word family felt like an accusation. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. "You don't know what it cost me to take care of her. The bills, the hospital visits, none of it was easy." I met his gaze. "She never asked you to pay her debts. She asked you to love her." His expression froze. A single muscle in his jaw twitched. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the truth. This wasn't about money or gratitude. It was about control, ownership. The same way he used to claim every toy, every room, every decision. Mother's will was just his final victory lap. The doctor stood, quietly excusing himself to refill his glass. The gesture was polite, but his eyes told me he understood. I wasn't imagining this. Daniel's arrogance had finally given him away. I set my fork down. "You said she owed you. But tell me, what did she owe for? Loving you too much? Forgiving you too quickly?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, slow and deliberate, like a man who believes he's untouchable. The candles burned lower, wax pooling around their bases. One leaned dangerously close to the edge, the flame licking at the cloth. He noticed, but didn't move. I reached for the candle to steady it. He just watched, eyes gleaming through the shadows. The candle tipped, and he didn't flinch. An envelope slid under my door at dawn. The sound was soft, almost polite, yet it tore through the quiet like a warning. The hallway outside was still dark when I opened the door, and the air smelled faintly of rain and dust. The envelope lay alone on the doormat, cream-colored, sealed with red wax, my name typed neatly across the front. No return address, no handwriting. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the rough edge of the paper. The seal looked official, too official to ignore. A flicker of unease crawled up my spine as I broke it open. Inside was a single folded sheet, an affidavit bearing my mother's name, notarized but unsigned. The first lines stole the breath from my lungs. It spoke of declining clarity, external influence, and pressure from kin to amend testamentary intent. My hands shook as I read the final paragraph. She expressed hesitation in the presence of Daniel, but was persuaded to proceed regardless. The room dimmed around me. The only light came from the weak glow of the lamp near the window, flickering slightly as though even it struggled to stand witness. I folded the document back along its crease, careful not to tear it, and placed it on the table beside the photograph of her. Her eyes in that picture had always seemed alive, steady, knowing. Now they accused me of being late. By noon, I was standing in the reception of Harland & Crow, the firm that had managed her estate. The marble floor gleamed like it had been polished with gilt. The receptionist glanced at the affidavit, her face draining of color, before she called for someone from upstairs. A junior partner arrived, a man no older than 30, thin, cautious. He led me into a narrow office lined with file cabinets that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. I handed him the affidavit without a word. He read it twice. The silence stretched. Finally, he looked up, eyes wary. "This shouldn't exist," he said quietly. "Yet here it is." He hesitated. "The document's legitimate, but it was never filed. If this surfaces, it could destroy your brother's claim and the firm's reputation for due diligence." "So you knew something was wrong?" He didn't deny it. "We were told she'd finalized her will under supervision. I wasn't part of that process." His tone softened. "You understand, some truths, they don't stay buried without reason." I leaned forward. "My mother didn't just lose her clarity. She lost her choice, and someone made sure of it." He shifted in his chair. "Be careful. You're walking into something much larger than you think. The family name carries weight, even in court." The words hung between us, cold and heavy. I gathered the affidavit and rose to leave. The overhead lights flickered again, dim and uncertain. It felt as if the building itself was trying to hide what it knew. Outside, the wind had picked up. I walked to the courthouse across the street, each step echoing louder than it should. Inside, I filed a formal request for review of the probate records. The clerk stamped it with a deep, hollow thud. Reference entry 31B. As I signed the petition, a single beam of weak light cut across the counter. It landed on the wax seal, still stuck to my fingers, cracked down the middle. I pressed it flat against the affidavit, my pulse steady now. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting, I was moving. I had crossed the line Daniel never thought I would. The seal was broken, just like our bloodline. The numbers didn't lie, but the faces did. The ledger sat open beneath the fluorescent lights, its pages whispering as I turned them. Each entry felt like a confession written in ink, cold, deliberate, final. The internal auditor across from me adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat before he spoke. "There are 4 transfers here," he said, "each for $25,000, all labeled consulting, and one final total of $100,000. His tone was careful, the kind men use when they know what they're saying will wound. I stared at the numbers, neat and tidy. No smudges, no hesitation. My brother's handwriting lived somewhere behind those transactions, his sense of control, his arrogance, his practiced calm. I could almost hear his voice from the dinner that broke us. Mother owed me. The auditor, a man named Collins, sighed and tapped the column with his pen. "We see this pattern often," he said softly. "Family members using joint access before probate. It happens more than you'd believe." "Not in my family," I whispered. But the words felt false even as they left me. He nodded toward the stamped reference number at the bottom of the report, entry 442A. "You should file this immediately. It's proof of pre-death withdrawals. It won't be easy, but it's something solid." The pages rustled again as I flipped them, the faint sound of paper against paper sharp as accusation. Each line blurred slightly, black ink bleeding into shadow. My pulse counted with the pages. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 transfers. 4 betrayals. He leaned back. "If you want, I can accompany you when you submit it." I shook my head. "No, I'll do it myself." Collins hesitated, then said quietly, "Be prepared. Once sunlight hits numbers like these, people stop pretending they love you." The truth of it landed harder than any figure in that ledger. By the time I stepped out of the building, the late afternoon light had turned the glass doors into mirrors. My reflection looked older, harder. I held the folder close as if it might burn me. The city hummed around me. Traffic, voices, the clinking of coins at a nearby cafe counter. Each sound felt exaggerated, reminding me how much the world carried on while mine unraveled. I walked straight to the courthouse annex where financial evidence was filed. The clerk recognized the firm's stamp and processed it quickly. I signed the submission slip, my pen scraping the paper with reluctant finality. Reference ID 442A, logged, sealed, undeniable. When I left, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think sunlight cleans everything? It only blinds you." No name, but I didn't need one. I could hear his voice behind it, steady, self-assured, venom wrapped in charm. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the copy of the audit. The sound of pages turning filled the silence, rhythmic and damning. I thought of all the coins my mother used to collect in a jar by the window. Each one polished, counted, loved. Daniel had turned her faith in order into his weapon. I made a decision then. I would not answer his calls. Not one message, not one attempt at reconciliation. I was done explaining what he already knew was wrong. Consent withdrawal. That's what the court called it when a victim stops granting access. I called it survival. The next morning, mutual friends began calling. "He's worried about you. He says this could ruin both of you. He just wants to talk." Their voices blurred together, gentle but rehearsed. He had weaponized sympathy, the oldest trick in his book. I said the same words to each of them. "Tell him this isn't about revenge, it's about truth." The line always went quiet after that. Late that night, another message arrived. "You'll regret this. Some things should stay in the dark." I turned off my phone, closed the folder, and pressed my palm against the embossed seal of the audit copy. The texture of the stamp was raised, ridged like scar tissue. My pulse steadied as I whispered to myself, "Numbers don't lie." Then I thought of his smirk, the way he toasted to new beginnings, and I realized he was never afraid of the dark. He thrived in it. He said I'd regret bringing sunlight to Numbers. My key no longer fit the lock. I turned it once, twice, metal grinding, refusing. The sound carried through the hallway like a quiet betrayal. Morning light filtered across the porch, soft and colorless, touching everything except the space where my hand trembled. The brass key was cold against my skin, pressing a small crescent into my palm, as if marking me for what I'd lost. A courier stood by the gate, his expression careful, rehearsed. "Delivery for the occupant," he said, holding out an envelope. "No name, just occupant." That word stung more than I expected. I tore it open. Inside was an eviction notice, legal tone, stamped and sealed. Non-payment of estate taxes, repossession pending. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust. My eyes followed the printed lines until the words blurred. Estate taxes? Fabricated. Every figure, every accusation, crafted to sound final. I called my protector, Eleanor, the housing officer assigned to my case. She arrived within the hour, her coat still damp from rain. She read the document twice, frowning. "This isn't just an error," she said quietly. "It's deliberate. Someone filed this through a private intermediary." "Daniel?" I whispered. The name felt like ash. She looked up, uncertain. "Do you have proof?" "Enough to know his handwriting when I see it." We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint creak of the porch boards beneath our feet. She folded the notice and slid it into a folder marked Reference Entry 512C. "I'll verify the filing. You shouldn't leave tonight." "I won't stay where I'm not welcome." The words surprised me, but they were true. The house had changed. The walls once carried the faint scent of lavender, Mother's sachets hidden in drawers, her favorite perfume lingering on curtains. Now it smelled of dust and deceit. Even the air felt heavier, as though loyalty had been vacuumed out of the space. I walked from room to room, each step echoing more than the last. The photographs on the mantel looked back at me like strangers. In one, Daniel and I as children, sitting on this very porch. He'd been holding a wooden keychain shaped like a heart. I remembered him saying, "A key means you belong somewhere." How cruel that memory had become. The house groaned as the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I set my keys on the counter and stared at the eviction notice spread open beside them. The numbers printed at the top, 2 exact figures, $8,000 owed, 10 days to vacate, felt like weights pressing down on me. It wasn't the money, it was the message. He was declaring war through paperwork. Eleanor's voice broke my thoughts. "You have the right to appeal. He can't push you out without due process." "He already has, just not legally yet." She stepped closer, lowering her tone. "You could expose this, make it public. It's the only way to stop him." Her words struck something in me, a resolve that had been forming quietly beneath grief and fatigue. I thought of all the silent ways Daniel had rewritten the truth. Wills, ledgers, now my address. He believed shame would keep me still, but silence had served him long enough. I looked out through the open doorway, where sunlight met shadow on the threshold. The line between inside and out blurred, like the line between family and enemy. My reflection in the window didn't look defeated anymore, it looked ready. "I'll face him," I said, Not in whispers or papers. Publicly. Eleanor nodded. Then I'll help you get there. She left soon after, promising to file the appeal by morning. The house felt impossibly still again. I gathered my coat, my mother's photograph, and the single brass key that no longer opened the door. I walked to the front step, where sunlight hit the stone just enough to warm it. I laid the key down carefully, its metal cold against my fingers. I didn't look back. I left the key on the step. The line crackled with breathing that wasn't mine. At first I thought it was static, a bad connection, but then came the pause, the kind of silence that listens back. I froze, the phone pressed against my ear, hearing faint, uneven breaths that matched neither rhythm nor reason. I whispered, "Who is this?" But there was only the hiss of distance, followed by the dull hum of a call that refused to end. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always between midnight and 1. The same number, the same sound. Each time, when I said hello, the air on the other end deepened, like someone leaning closer but refusing to speak. By the 4th call, I stopped answering. I'd stare at the phone vibrating on the table, its glow pulsing in the dark room like a heartbeat I didn't want to claim. But ignoring it didn't help. The calls kept coming, relentless, mocking. When I finally picked up again, I said, "Daniel, stop this." The silence broke with a soft exhale, then a click. I reported it the next morning. Officer Ray met me in the station's quiet corner, his uniform crisp, his eyes kind but tired. "You did the right thing," he said, setting a small recording device on the table. "Keep this near your phone. Next time, let it run. We'll catch the source." I nodded, but my hands trembled as I took the device. "What if it's untraceable?" He smiled faintly. "Everything leaves a trail, even silence." That night, I kept the recorder on. The call came at 12:14 a.m. Exactly. I pressed play as I answered. Again, the breathing, slow, intentional. Then a faint hum, almost like someone whispering through a wall. I could hear a distant clock ticking behind me, matching the slow pulse in my wrist. "Say something," I whispered, "if you have the courage." A long pause, then very softly, a voice, not Daniel's, but his assistant's, murmured a single line, "You should stop digging." The call ended. By morning, Ray had already traced the signal. "It came from a landline registered to your brother's office," he said. His assistant made the call. He looked uneasy, shifting in his seat. "He's crossing into harassment territory now. I'll file it formally." "Formally?" I repeated. That word used to mean safety. He handed me a printed call log, reference entry 611F. My number circled in red ink, repeated 15 times over 7 nights. "Keep this," he said. "You'll need it." The paper felt heavier than evidence. It felt like proof that the line between family and enemy had vanished completely. For the rest of that week, I kept my phone face down. Every vibration made me flinch. Even the sound of rain against the windows began to mimic that faint static hiss. Exhaustion settled in, thick and restless. I started hearing silence differently, not as peace, but as surveillance. It filled the spaces between breaths, between thoughts. Every quiet moment belonged to him now. Ray called 2 days later. "We've opened a file, case number 749C. It's active, and we'll monitor all contact." His tone softened. "You're not alone in this." Not alone. The words should have comforted me, but they didn't, because being watched, by the law or by him, felt the same. That night, I set the recorder on the nightstand again, though I told myself I wouldn't answer if the phone rang. At 12:18, it did, the same number. My body froze, torn between fear and defiance. I let it ring 6 times. Then, with a shaking hand, I picked up. The line opened with a hiss. Then, my name, spoken softly, by a voice that used to call me family. The last call ended with my own name. They said there was no record, but I had the receipt. The words echoed down the marble hallway, swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights that flickered like nervous witnesses. The clerk behind the counter blinked, her eyes darting between her screen and the stamped paper in my hand. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The system shows nothing under that entry." I slid the document forward. The stamp was clear. Reference entry 74-9C. Dated, sealed, undeniable. "Then your system is wrong," I said quietly. She frowned, reading the lines twice, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if truth itself needed permission to reappear. Behind her, a ceiling fan turned lazily, stirring warm, stale air that smelled faintly of paper and toner. The rhythm of its blades matched my heartbeat, steady, stubborn, alive. "I submitted this in person," I continued, "to this very desk. You can check the logbook for March 12th. She hesitated. "That's not accessible without supervisor clearance. Then call your supervisor." My tone surprised even me, firm, not pleading. A few people waiting in line turned their heads. The sound of folders shuffling, pens tapping, whispers rising. Bureaucracy had its own soundtrack, and I'd learned to read every note. The clerk picked up the phone. "Yes, Miss Raines? Could you come to records?" Her gaze flicked up to me again, a touch of sympathy in her eyes. "It'll just take a minute." When the supervisor arrived, her heels struck the floor like a metronome. "What seems to be the issue?" I handed her the stamped receipt. She examined it, then exhaled through her nose. "This isn't in our archive queue," she said. "That's because someone removed it," I replied. "I filed for review 2 weeks ago. The record should be there." Her jaw tightened. "Who processed it?" "I don't know, but that's your department's duty to find out." The fluorescent light above us flickered, throwing a brief shadow across the counter before steadying again. Supervisor noticed it too. Her eyes flicked upward, then back to me. "I'll check the backup drive," she said. Minutes passed. I could hear the low hum of the printer in the back room, the muffled clatter of drawers opening, closing, then silence. When she returned, her expression had shifted, no longer defensive, but careful. "We found it," she said. "The record was marked as transferred, but there's no destination file. Someone rerouted it." Rerouted, a tidy word for sabotage. She looked at me again, softer now. "We'll restore it," she promised, "and an inquiry will be logged." The flicker of light above steadied completely. It felt like fragile justice returning, unsteady but present. "Make sure the restoration carries today's date," I said. "And note the delay." The clerk nodded quickly, typing as I spoke. When she handed me the new file copy, the folder was warm from the printer's heat, its edges curling slightly. I ran my thumb along the stamp before slipping it into my bag. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of a few people watching from nearby benches. Some pretended to read newspapers, others just stared. Whispers trailed after me, about missing files, about the woman who refused to vanish quietly. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed under afternoon sun. A man I didn't recognize stood by the railing, pretending to scroll through his phone. I'd learned to recognize that kind of stillness. Someone planted, not waiting. I walked past him without pause. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number again, but this time I ignored it. I'd already filed the formal notice of misconduct with the oversight office that morning. They'd stamped it, signed it, logged it. Real paper, real ink. Halfway down the steps, I stopped and turned back toward the entrance. Through the glass doors, I saw the clerk place a small vase on her desk. Fresh white lilies, still wrapped in florist paper. The delivery tag read, "For your kindness, D." He sent flowers to the clerk's desk. They made my pain a headline. I saw it first in the reflection of a shop window, the screen behind the glass, flashing with his face. Daniel sat in some polished studio, eyes red, voice trembling, rehearsed grief on display. The caption beneath him read, "Family rift deepens amid mental health concerns." He spoke softly, almost tenderly. "I tried to help her," he said, "but she wouldn't listen. She's lost." The reporter leaned in, sympathetic. It must be difficult watching a loved one unravel publicly. Daniel nodded, pressing a folded handkerchief to his eyes. The camera zoomed closer, catching every false tremor. The studio lights gleamed like absolution, granting him the dignity of victimhood. I stood on the sidewalk, breath caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. People around me glanced up at the same broadcast, then at me, not realizing they were looking at the woman he'd just disassembled on air. The sound of camera shutters came next, not in the studio, but outside the courthouse gates where reporters now gathered, their questions like bullets dressed as curiosity. Did you hear what he said? Are you responding to his claims? Is it true you've been removed from the estate? Each flash burned white against my vision. The static hiss of microphones filled the space where silence used to live. That night, my ally called. A journalist, someone who once wrote about corruption, not gossip. I saw the segment, he said. They're using pity as armor. But you can fight this if you want to go public. I don't want pity, I said. I want truth. He paused. Then let's publish the affidavit. We met at a small cafe on 7th Street, the kind where conversations drowned beneath the hum of espresso machines. He placed his laptop between us. I'll redact what needs protecting, but the rest, the numbers, the transactions, the court file, people should see. I nodded. Do it. The click of his keyboard sounded like a fuse being lit. Within hours, the documents were online. Real signatures, real entries, reference 442A, tied to the same financial transfers Daniel swore never existed. Screens lit up with screenshots, hashtags, debates. The tide shifted, slowly but visibly. The next morning, reporters' questions changed tone. No longer whispers about instability, but queries about fraud, accountability, evidence. Public sympathy began to fracture, turning curiosity into reckoning. At noon, I stood outside the courthouse again. The crowd was larger now, some holding newspapers, others recording with phones. A headline fluttered against the wind from a nearby stand. Brothers' ledger exposed. Audit confirms missing funds. Still, Daniel played his role perfectly. He arrived flanked by his lawyer, head bowed, lips pressed tight. He didn't look at me, not once, but I felt his presence, the same way you feel a shadow in sunlight, something blocking warmth without form. One reporter shouted, "Do you regret speaking out?" I turned, met their lens directly. "No," I said. "Regret belongs to those who lie for applause." The crowd murmured, a ripple of surprise and silence, the first real silence that belonged to me in months. Later that evening, I watched another clip, this one of my ally's broadcast, his voice steady, factual. Public records confirm manipulation of estate assets totaling $100,000. The alleged victim, previously discredited, has now provided verifiable proof. That word, verifiable, rang like justice's first heartbeat. The camera flashes returned in my mind, sharp and rhythmic. Once they felt like gunfire, now they sounded like war drums. A strange calm followed, not triumph, but the kind that comes when the truth finally stops hiding. I sat by the window, the glow of the city flickering across my reflection. Somewhere, I imagined Daniel rehearsing his next move, another plea for sympathy. But the stage had shifted. The world had seen enough tears to start asking questions. Tomorrow, the lawyer will stand up. He cleared his throat, and silence bowed to him. The courtroom was a cathedral of waiting, the kind that tests patience more than faith. Every breath, every rustle of paper, every creak of a wooden bench felt amplified beneath the weight of judgment. The air smelled faintly of dust and ink, the scent of institutions that rarely hurry for anyone's truth. Daniel sat across the aisle, his tie too neat, his smirk too steady. He'd always known how to dress deceit as dignity. His lawyer leaned close, whispering something that made him chuckle. The sound was soft, but it carried. Then my lawyer stood, calm, collected, every eye turned. "Your Honor, he began, his voice firm enough to still the whispers. "Before we proceed, I'd like to present new evidence, an official transcript, reference entry 118B, verified and certified by the clerk's office this morning." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel's smirk faltered for half a second, just long enough for me to see the crack. The bailiff carried a brown folder forward. Inside it, proof of everything he'd buried. The will, the signature, the date stamps, all exposed beneath harsh light. The lawyer flipped a single page and continued. "This document confirms that the estate transfer he claims to have executed was never filed through our office. The signatures do not match. The ledger was altered after submission." The judge leaned forward. "Do you have verification?" "Yes, Your Honor. Attached to page 3, entry 118B, verified under oath by the records custodian." The words were sharp, clean, surgical. No embellishment, no mercy. Daniel shifted, his hands clasped too tightly now, knuckles pale. His lawyer whispered again, this time with less confidence. The clerk approached the bench and handed the folder to the judge. The pages turned slowly, each one echoing in the chamber like a confession. I could feel my heartbeat matching the rhythm of the gavel that hadn't yet struck. Every second stretched, suspended, holding the balance between ruin and redemption. The judge looked up. "Mr. Hale," he said to Daniel, "would you like to respond to this evidence?" Daniel stood, straightened his jacket, and tried to smile. "Your Honor, this must be a mistake. Perhaps a clerical misfiling," my lawyer interrupted, measured but unflinching. "With respect, Your Honor, this mistake has names, dates, and handwriting analysis, and it all leads back to him." A ripple of gasps moved through the audience benches. Cameras from the press gallery clicked like insects feeding on scandal. For a brief moment, Daniel looked at me. His eyes carried something. Panic, maybe, or recognition that the story he built was burning down, and I was the one holding the match. The judge raised his hand for silence. "The evidence will be entered into the record. We will recess until this afternoon to allow both parties to review." The gavel struck once, then again. The sound was final, resonant, like truth being stamped into the floor. As the courtroom emptied, I stayed seated. My lawyer gathered his papers, leaned toward me, and whispered, "It's done. He can't hide behind paperwork anymore." I nodded, but my throat was dry. Around me, murmurs swirled, voices blending disbelief with vindication. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with caution, as if truth might be contagious. Daniel didn't move right away. His lawyer spoke to him in low tones, but he just stared at the folder on the table, the one that held his undoing. For the first time, I saw his face without pretense. No charm, no deflection, just the hollow outline of a man who thought institutions would always bend for him. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the wooden rail. The light above flickered, cold and merciless, illuminating the faint dust swirling between us. He looked up once, halfway, and then down again. He wouldn't meet my eyes again. They stripped his title before the cameras stopped rolling. The newsroom smelled of stale coffee and hot cables, the scent of exposure. Screens blazed with headlines about corruption. The same man who once smiled from those very broadcasts, now caught between security guards and shame. Daniel walked through the corridor he once commanded, his polished shoes clicking against the floor like an unbroken habit. People stepped aside, some whispering, some pretending not to see. I stood near the back, close enough to hear the low hum of voices, but far enough to be unseen. The firm's director read the statement aloud, her tone steady, merciless. "Effective immediately, Mr. Hale's position is terminated due to confirmed misconduct, falsified documentation, and conflict of interest with institutional funds." The sound of paper tearing cut through the air. The official termination notice, ripped from its folder, its edge catching light for a second before falling. I'll never forget that sound. It was the softest kind of justice, but justice all the same. He looked around as though still expecting someone to intervene. No one did. His own allies stared at their desks. A few reporters watched through glass partitions, their reflections overlapping his. Two versions of the same man, one still standing, the other already gone. My ally, the witness from the audit team, stood beside me. "It's over," he whispered. "The State Bar confirmed it an hour ago. Case reference 114-2B. They've disbarred him." I nodded, though I couldn't find any satisfaction in the words. "He'll still find us a way to justify it," I said quietly. "Men like him always do." "Maybe," he replied, "but not on paper anymore." The desks around us buzzed with quiet gossip. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Headlines were drafted. The same machinery that once praised him now documented his undoing. That was the true symmetry of it all. Institutions turning inward, correcting their own betrayal. I watched as Daniel handed over his badge. The metal caught the fluorescent light one last time before landing in the cardboard box held by security. His hand lingered over it, unwilling to let go. "You can't erase me," he said, voice trembling with something between anger and disbelief. "No," I thought, "but you can be recorded differently." He walked past me then, eyes blank, searching for someone who might still see him as more than the story he became. But no one spoke. The whisper of printers filled the silence where his authority once lived. Outside, a few journalists waited by the revolving doors, cameras ready. He hesitated, straightened his jacket, then stepped into the flash. I could hear the questions, the same sharp, eager voices he once fed stories to. "Is it true you forged records? Will you appeal the ruling? Did your sister report you?" He said nothing. The sound of shutters rolled like distant thunder. He moved quickly through the crowd, head down, the wind catching the edges of the disbarment letter sticking from the box. Inside, the director approached me. "The Ethics Board has filed the suspension notice formally," she said. "It'll be archived by noon. His access has already been revoked." There was nothing left to say. I thanked her and turned toward the corridor. For the first time, the building felt lighter, as if years of false weight had been lifted from its walls. My ally caught up beside me. "You should go home," he said. "It's done." "Not yet," I replied. "Justice is never done. It just changes shape." He nodded, understanding. The fluorescent lights flickered again, dimming slightly before holding steady. That small pulse of light felt like a signal, closure disguised as exhaustion. Through the glass panel of his old office, I saw the cleaning crew already at work. They wiped down his desk, collected pens, folded documents, and removed the brass nameplate. It came off cleanly, leaving a pale rectangle behind where recognition used to live. He had once told me that legacy was everything, that names outlast mistakes. He was wrong. His name left the brass plate on the door. The door opened with the same old creak. For a moment, I didn't step inside. The sunlight fell across the threshold, dividing memory from present, grief from calm. Dust floated in that light, slow, deliberate, weightless, as though time itself had been waiting for me to return. Weeks had passed since the courtroom, but this silence was louder than any verdict. I stood there with the keys still in my hand, afraid to believe that it was truly over. The scent of lavender drifted faintly from the hallway, not from bottles or polish this time, but from the walls themselves, the way old houses remember what once made them whole. I walked in. The floorboards groaned in recognition. Every sound, every corner seemed to breathe again. The same sunlight that once felt like accusation now lay warm on the faded rug. My protector from the housing board followed me quietly, holding the folder that had taken months, years perhaps, to earn. He placed it on the table, the same one where my mother used to keep her letters. "It's official," he said softly. "The title's been restored. The estate records show your name." I nodded, but words wouldn't come. My eyes caught the corner of the document where the seal shimmered under light, my name inked beside the word, owner. "I never thought this house would breathe again," I whispered. He smiled. "Neither did I. But justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just signs quietly." The paper felt warm beneath my fingertips, as though carrying the pulse of every fight that brought it here. $18,000 in legal fees, 12 hearings, and 1,000 sleepless hours, each one distilled into a line of ink and a signature of truth. I walked through the rooms slowly, tracing the path I once avoided. The cracked frame of the mirror still leaned against the wall, the one my mother used to adjust her hair before church. I could almost hear her humming in the kitchen. The air carried her, soft, gentle, proud. In the living room, the light deepened, filling every corner where darkness had once settled. The sound of the front door closing behind me felt final, not in the way of endings, but of release. I turned to the protector. "I'm not sure I know how to live without a fight anymore." He shrugged. "Then start small. Paint the walls, open the windows. Let peace sound ordinary again." For the first time in years, I smiled without restraint. Maybe I will. He left quietly, leaving the folder on the table. The latch clicked, and the house returned to its natural rhythm. No witnesses, no voices, just the echo of a home reclaiming itself. I walked to the window where the afternoon light touched the curtains, the same spot where I once cried, the same one where I promised myself I'd never be driven out again. My reflection in the glass no longer looked haunted. It looked steady. Outside, the garden had grown wild, grass tall, ivy climbing the fence, but in the middle, a single patch of lavender bloomed, resilient, stubborn, alive. The scent drifted in when I opened the window. I whispered, "We're home." There was no answer, but the quiet changed. It filled the space, soft and forgiving. I sat on the floor, hands on the wood that once carried every step of my family, and closed my eyes. The sun slipped lower, spilling through the doorway. I felt its warmth across my hands, steady and sure, like the house was breathing again. The house exhaled, as if forgiving me. Spring returned where sorrow had settled. The earth was softer than I remembered, its scent rich and grounding, like forgiveness made tangible. I knelt by the porch where weeds had overtaken what once bloomed, fingers pressing into soil that had carried both silence and memory. The sun leaned low across the house, tracing the same path it used to take when Mother read by the window. I opened the small box I'd kept sealed for months. Inside lay the pressed flower from her hymn book, its petals thin as breath, its color faint but persistent. I placed it beside the first rose stem, not as an offering, but as a return. The shovel felt heavier than before, but my movements were steady. Each patch of soil turned like a page rewritten. This was never about winning, I murmured to no one, only about remembering right. By noon, 2 neighbors came by, Tom with his wheelbarrow, and Alice carrying seedlings wrapped in paper. They didn't ask questions. They just joined in, quiet, purposeful. The scrape of metal against earth and the rustle of leaves filled the air with a rhythm more honest than any courtroom oath. When we paused for water, Alice looked at the porch and said, "Feels like she never left." I smiled faintly. She didn't. She's in everything that decided to grow again. The air held the faint scent of earth, raw, forgiving, alive. My hands were streaked with dirt, the kind that doesn't wash away but softens with time. I closed my eyes and listened. The hum of bees, the gentle clink of trowels, the distant ringing of a church bell from the valley. It was all one sound, the world remembering how to breathe. I hummed the hymn Mother loved, the one she'd whisper while folding laundry or waiting for the kettle. The words weren't there anymore, but the melody was. The roses swayed in rhythm, small and tender, like children nodding in agreement. For the first time in years, I felt the absence of anger. The space it left behind wasn't empty. It was wide enough for peace to move in. Justice had done its work, but healing was quieter. It came not in papers or verdicts, but in petals and soil. As we finished the last row, Tom stood back and wiped his brow. "You've rebuilt more than the garden," he said. "Maybe," I answered. "Maybe it's the garden rebuilding me." He chuckled softly and left with a wave, the wheelbarrow creaking down the lane. The day leaned toward evening, gold lights spilling across the porch steps. The roses glowed faintly, their shadows long and unbroken. I sat there until the air cooled, listening to the small, living noises, the whisper of wind through leaves, the soft thud of a bird landing on the fence. The kind of sounds I used to ignore when my heart was too loud. I took the empty box, folded it shut, and buried it near the oldest rose bush. "You kept me alive longer than I realized," I whispered, "but it's time you rest too." The soil received it gently. The scent of earth deepened, almost sweet now, carrying a trace of rain yet to come. I stayed kneeling there, one hand pressed to the ground until the last bit of sunlight slipped beneath the fence. The house behind me stood still, not waiting anymore, just being. The roses were small now, but they would grow. Everything does, once the truth has air. I whispered back to the soil. Weeks passed without a word from him. Days blurred into one another, the kind of quiet that stretches across time like unbroken thread. The clock on the mantel ticked with maddening precision, each second a reminder that absence, too, has a sound. I told myself I was done waiting, but the truth was crueler. I still expected something, even if I couldn't name what. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address, only the familiar tilt of his handwriting on the envelope. My heart stumbled once before steadying again. The paper felt colder than it should have, its edges sharp, deliberate. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening it. The clock behind me struck once, twice, each chime heavier than the last. Finally, I tore the seal. Inside, there was a single blank sheet. Not a word. Not even his name. For a moment I thought it was a mistake, that maybe the ink had faded, or the words had been written in invisible defiance. But no, the silence was intentional, meant, designed to say what he could never bring himself to admit. I stared at that emptiness until the lines of the paper began to blur. "This is all he had left," I whispered, "an empty page for everything he erased." My ally from the legal office called that evening. "We received notice confirming his departure from the state," he said. "No appeal, no statement, just gone." I told him about the envelope. There was a pause on the line, then a quiet reply. "Keep it sealed. Let it stand as proof. Some records don't need rewriting." After the call, I placed the letter beside the old will in the drawer. 2 documents, one full of deceit, the other void of confession. Together they told the whole story better than either ever could alone. The ticking clock grew louder. I thought of all the hours I had spent fighting his version of truth, all the nights I measured justice by noise, arguments, papers, verdicts. But this silence carried more weight than every word that came before. I walked to the window. The garden outside shimmered under the faint light, the rose bushes still holding their bloom. A faint breeze stirred them, soft and unjudging. Somewhere, a bell rang in the distance, pulling me back into the rhythm of now. I ran my thumb over the envelope seal. It had hardened, brittle, at the edges like the skin that forms over an old wound. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to open it again. He's still trying to control the story, I thought, but I've already written my ending. The clock struck 12. I smiled at its persistence, steady, unrelenting, impartial. Time doesn't wait for apologies. It just moves forward, carrying truth along with it. I placed the envelope inside the drawer once more, this time carefully, almost reverently. "Stay there," I whispered. "You belong to the past." The house felt still afterward. The same stillness that once frightened me now felt like peace. I realized that sometimes closure doesn't arrive in words or tears. It arrives when you stop expecting noise. As I turned off the lamp, the faint sound of ticking filled the dark again. Each beat seemed slower now, like the house itself was breathing easier. I didn't need him to speak. I didn't need to forgive. I only needed to stop listening. His silence became my answer. The water moved the way memories do, slow, relentless. I sat on the bench where the path curved toward the riverbank, the same place she once brought me as a child. The air was cool, gentle against my skin, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The pendant in my hand had grown dull over the years, its engraving softened by time. Still, I could feel her touch in its weight, her voice in the way the chain slipped through my fingers. The light fell softly across the water, breaking into quiet ripples that shimmered like forgiveness. I watched them move outward, ever widening, ever fading. It struck me how grief does the same. It starts loud, almost unbearable, then settles into something that just exists, like a current beneath the surface. I traced the worn letters on the pendant. The words barely showed anymore, but I didn't need to read them. I knew what they said. Her name, her faith, her reminder that truth outlasts pride. A small stone rested beside my foot, half buried in moss. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. It was smooth, cool, marked by time, the way people are after surviving too much. I used to think I'd never stop fighting, I whispered. But maybe peace isn't surrender. Maybe it's what happens after the shouting ends. The protector had told me weeks ago that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about re-entering the same place without breaking. Sitting here proved he was right. The sunlight flickered between clouds, reflecting off the river like memory refusing to dim. I breathed in slowly, listening to the quiet hum of water against stone. It wasn't silence. It was a conversation, one that no longer needed words. A child's laughter echoed faintly from the far side of the bank. For a moment I imagined it was mine from years ago, back when I thought safety was a place instead of a state of heart. I smiled. Maybe both were true now. The pendant caught a glint of light. I lifted it toward the sun, watching its surface brighten, then dim again. It wasn't perfect anymore, but it was real, and that was enough. Everything that once tore me apart now lived in harmony inside me. The anger, the grief, the love, they didn't cancel each other. They completed the same sentence. The protector's voice still echoed in memory. You can't rewrite the past, but you can stop rereading it. He was right. I didn't need the documents, the verdicts, the noise. They had all done their work. What mattered now was that the truth had stood without me needing to hold it up anymore. I let the pendant fall back against my chest. Its cool touch steadied me. Across the river, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft, careful, like the world learning gentleness again. The scent of wet earth rose into the air, grounding, eternal. I stayed seated, letting the drizzle touch my hands, my face, the pendant. Each drop felt like punctuation to a story that had finally said everything it needed to. The current carried a single leaf downstream, twirling as it went, free and unburdened. I followed it with my eyes until it disappeared into the bend. "Thank you," I whispered, not to her, not to him, but to everything that had hurt and taught and changed me. The river's song deepened, its rhythm slow and full, like the closing refrain of a hymn. The light dimmed to gold, reflecting the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and stays. The river carried her hymn. He whispered once that the will was his. The memory returned like dust caught in sunlight, quiet, suspended, unashamed. I stood at the podium in the church hall, a small gathering before me. Months had passed since the verdict, enough time for wounds to fade into soft scars. Yet as I held the court certificate, its embossed seal catching golden light, I felt the weight of everything that had led here. The air smelled faintly of lavender, the same fragrance that used to cling to her hymn book. Someone must have placed a sachet near the altar. It was almost too perfect a coincidence, but then grief has its own way of looping back to what it once loved. I unfolded the paper slowly. The rustle echoed faintly through the hall, joined by the muted hum of the organist tuning a final note. By order of the state court, I read, the estate remains under rightful ownership. My voice trembled for half a breath, then steadied. Applause rose, gentle but certain, like rain tapping against stained glass. The light shifted, scattering golden fragments across the pews and onto the faces of those who had stood by me. My ally, the arbiter, gave a small nod from the front row, approval without pride. I caught sight of the hymn book on the front table, its pages worn, its cover softened by years of hands and hope. I opened it to the first song Mother ever taught me. The words blurred for a moment, then found their rhythm again. She believed that love outlasts possession, I said quietly. That it isn't something you win, it's something you hold until it teaches you to let go. A few heads bowed, the rest just listened. Even silence can be reverent when truth finally speaks. I thought of him, the man who once whispered that the will was his. I remembered the arrogance in his tone, the way his shadow filled every room he entered. But I also remembered the moment that shadow broke, the instant the gavel struck, twice, sealing his defeat. Not in anger, not in vengeance, in justice. Her will was never yours, I said now, letting the words travel through the stillness. It was her love. The echo lingered longer than I expected, weaving between the rafters before settling in the hush that followed. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Outside, sunlight spilled across the church steps, gold on stone. I stepped down, certificate still in hand, and watched the light stretch toward the river. People began to leave in pairs and quiet groups, their voices soft, like forgiveness spoken under breath. The arbiter joined me at the door. "You did well," he said. "Peace suits you." "Maybe," I replied. "Maybe it was waiting for me to stop fighting." He smiled. "It usually is." I walked toward the courtyard garden, where the lavender bushes had begun to bloom again. The scent rose gently in the air, familiar and clean. I bent to touch one of the stems, its color deep, unwavering, alive. For a moment, I imagined her standing beside me, humming that same old hymn. Nothing grand, just the melody of a life made right again. The world felt lighter then, like it was exhaling too. I looked up once more at the stained glass, the light still painting soft colors across the walls. The same light that had witnessed everything, from lies to truth, from betrayal to grace. And in that glow, for the first time, I understood what she meant when she said that love, when true, always finds a voice strong enough to answer. Her will was never yours. It was her love.